Hi, folks. If you're just joining us, we're waiting for others to join the Zoom webinar, and then we'll get started shortly. We'll just give it one more minute, folks, as we wait for people to join us, and then we will get started with the presentation. Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, everyone. Had a few problems with that pesky mute button. We are so happy that you are joining us today for our session on extracurricular activities and the college application. My name is Emily Fry, and I'm an Associate Director of Admission, and I'll have my colleague introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Carmona, and I'm an admissions counselor here at Penn.
Just to go over a few housekeeping things, if you are looking for closed captioning, that is available. You can just click the CC button on the Zoom menu. Additionally, if you have questions as we go through the presentation, feel free to enter those into the Q&A box. And we also are going to be covering mostly the extracurricular activity section of the application. So if you have further questions on Penn or the admission process, we would encourage you to explore our full range of virtual programming. And we'll have the link to our virtual visit section of our website in the last slide of the presentation today. So as we get started, we want to cover the agenda of what we'll be going through today. So first of all, we'll be talking about why do activities matter in the college admission process? We'll also be talking about the importance of context and how admission officers use context when we look at those extracurricular activities. We'll also spend some time talking about what is an activity and how can you think about the things you're doing outside of the classroom. And we'll go over some tips as to how you can best present those activities on your application and close with some of our final suggestions on how you can approach the activities section of your application. So with that, I will turn it over to Diana.
Thanks, Emily. So let's kind of just go to the basics here. Why do activities matter? And why did they warrant having a 45-minute session of their own? And I kind of like to refer back to mine and Emily's roles as admissions officers. Our job is, yes, of course, to build a class, and that means that academically we're bringing together some of the most academically talented 17-year-olds in the world, but also we're trying to build a community in addition to that. Our university experience, whether that's in person or virtual, extends way beyond the 15 hours a week that you're going to spend in a classroom. Outside those classroom walls or those Zoom walls, we want to create a community where students can come together, and we want to understand how they might learn and engage with one another. So beyond your transcript, we as AOs are really working together and reviewing the other pieces of your application to understand the impact that you've made in your school and your community and beyond, and how you might engage in the world here at Penn. When we reference the activity section, we really hope that you understand this is everything that you do when you're outside of the classroom. This is, of course, those academically adjacent activities like your clubs, your extracurriculars, athletics, but also community service, employment, family responsibilities, hobbies, etc. So to summarize, how you spend your time outside of the classroom is part of your personal story. And that's the personal story that we're trying to understand as we're reviewing your application.
Great, thanks, Diana. So I mentioned earlier that context is really important for admission officers when we think about the activities you're involved with outside of the classroom. And that context has a few different lenses. There's the global context, the community context, and then your personal context. So when we talk about the global context, in this year, 2020, that's probably going to encompass COVID-19. And we know that COVID-19 may have impacted the activities you're involved with in a few different ways. First of all, just to exist during a global pandemic takes a lot of energy and time. And so you might not be involved in activities in the same way you were before the pandemic. Secondly, we know that your school may have pivoted to virtual learning, and so you don't have the same activity options available to you. Fall sports might have been canceled for this year. There might not be any set to design for the school musical. Maybe there aren't any debate championships to organize. And so we know that that could have had a really big impact on what you're able to be involved with this year. That said, we know that your high school experience is more than just this one year. And so we really want to understand, yes, how this COVID context has impacted your activities, but we want to know that full context. We want to know what you've been involved with 9th grade all the way through 12th grade. Then there's also that community context. And similarly to COVID-19, every community is dealing with COVID in different ways. So some schools and school systems, they may have gone virtual, others maybe are in person. So again, we know that every community looks different. We also know that every community has different opportunities available to its students and different cultural norms. Some areas, the activities are bountiful and schools have hundreds of clubs available to their students, and others just have a dozen or so. We know that that would impact what you're doing outside of the classroom. We also know that every community is different in terms of the resources available to its students. One community might be, or one high school might be located near a local university, and so students have the opportunity to do research at that university, while in another high school, that's just not available. We know that that community aspect comes into play. There's also that personal context, and we know that you have so many different pieces that make up your personal story and journey, and so we want to understand how they all come together. We know there are certain constraints. Perhaps you had a concussion one year that limited the extracurricular activities you could be involved with, or perhaps you have significant family responsibilities, which takes up some time outside of the classroom and impacts how you're involved as well. So we know there are all of these ways that your personal story comes together. And I think the other thing to emphasize here with all of those different context pieces, when we talk about that global context and that community context, that's something that we as AOs can find on our own. So perhaps we do a Google search and we see how your school system has responded to COVID, whether they've canceled sports, whether they're in person. We also can see through your school profile or your counselor letter Perhaps there have been budget cuts this year, and so an activity you were heavily involved in the past few years, that's been canceled. Again, we're able to find that community context there, but that personal context, we only know that if you tell us. And so we really hope you'll make the best use of your application, both the activities section and the additional information session, to really give us the full extent of your personal story.
So again, returning to the basics, really understanding what counts as an activity. We're going to break this down into just 3 small sections to make it a little bit more digestible. But these essentially are the questions that we as admissions officers are hoping to answer as we're learning about you and learning about the activities that you've engaged in. And I want to start under this interests box by dispelling a myth. So admissions officers are not looking for a specific interest or activity or job or hobby when reviewing your application. Your interests and how you spend your time are what make you unique. They're part of your personal story. Whether you're caring for a relative or working over 10 hours a week or leading the soccer team, how you spend your time, again, it provides context into who you are outside of the classroom. And that's ultimately what we're trying to understand, what those contributions are going to look like. In this middle box under engagement, I said earlier that as we're building our class, we're also building a community. So that means that we're looking for roommates and teammates, lab partners and friends as we're reviewing these applications. And we want to understand through your engagement how you'll be a Penn citizen, how you'll interact with others on campus, and how you'll take advantage of the resources that we have on Penn's campus. And finally, under this last box, under responsibilities, we really hope that you don't conflate leadership and responsibility with title. Those two don't necessarily exist on the same plane. So maybe you're not the manager of your local ice cream shop where you work over the summer, but you are entrusted to open and close the store regularly. Maybe you're one of many students working at a lab at a local college, but you're the only high school student there. Or maybe you're the student council president, so you do have that title, but you've worked to create a new project or a new program in your high school that no student council president has done before. This is what Emily was referring to in that unique individual context that we're trying to understand. And again, that's information that only you can provide. So we're really hoping that you're able to provide those specifics in those sections. I think the big takeaway here is that the impact that you've made in your roles is just as important as the number of roles or the types of roles that you may have had. Great. So what is an activity? Again, I'm going to continue this trend of having these 3 boxes. I'm not going to read all of these out loud, but I do want to point out some specifics here that you may not have considered at your stage. I know that some of them would have been really new to me as a high schooler while thinking about my application. Beginning under interest, I want to point out this performing arts hobbies piece. So when maybe you're in your orchestra, in your school orchestra or your local orchestra, when we ask about that time commitment, we of course want you to note how regularly or how much you're rehearsing with that large group, but also consider the amount of time that you spent practicing for that audition or just to be in that orchestra, in that performing arts group. That's important context that we want to know too. In terms of engagement, so I see service here. I see putting your voice or talents to use. Maybe you organized a petition in your school, and this isn't an activity that you signed up for at the beginning of the year. This isn't in that activities sheet that your school might send out at the beginning of each year. But this still tells us about what your interests are and how you've chosen to spend your time in high school. And then finally, under responsibility, something that I know I didn't really think about in high school was this last bullet about substantial commutes. So maybe you live in New York City and you live in one borough and travel to another via public transit to get to your school. Or maybe you live in a really densely populated area where it'll take you over 45 minutes in rush hour to travel 5 miles. So maybe when we're looking at a Google map, for example, trying to understand where your home address is in relation to your school, it doesn't look too far for us, but really at the moment when you're actually traveling, when that was happening, doing, that could actually have been a substantial lift for you. So that's all important information that, again, we hope that you can give us.
There's that unmute button again. So as Diana was talking about the activities, those interests, responsibilities, engagement, you've maybe been thinking about, okay, well, what am I involved with in high school, and how can I effectively convey that to colleges and universities? And again, context is really key here. And we'll go through some of the key things that we want to know, but you want to put your best foot forward when you apply to a college. And the way to do that is by fully filling out the application. So on both the Common Application and the Coalition application, there is an activities section, which has some of these prompts that you'll see on the screen here. And as you're filling that out, you might find that some of the activities you're involved with, it doesn't fit quite neatly into those different prompts. And so you'd love to include an expanded resume. And you absolutely can do that. In fact, we would encourage you to do so if you feel that better reflects your activities. However, what you don't want to do is just submit a resume and not fill out that section of the application. Again, that's the part of putting your best foot forward and trying to give us as much information as possible. So, what information are we hoping that you'll give us in the application? So one, the activity name. And so if you're part of FBLA, spell that out for us. Tell us that that is the Future Business Leaders of America. Don't rely on us to just know what that acronym stands for. We also want to know, what has your role been in this organization? Maybe you started out as secretary of the club and ended up president by the end. Tell us if there's been a progression of leadership. We also want to know, when did you participate in this activity? Did you start in 9th grade or 11th grade? Or maybe it's something that you joined in 9th grade and were heavily involved in, but for some reason in 11th grade you had to quit. Maybe it was an injury, maybe it was COVID related, maybe it was a budget cut at your school and that activity was eliminated. Let us know why that change has maybe occurred. We also want to know the scope of the activity. So is this a club affiliated with your school? Is it at the regional level? Is it at the national level? So for example, maybe you're involved in Key Club, and maybe you're a leader of Key Club in your school, or perhaps you sit on the regional board of Key Club and you work with students across your state and region, or perhaps you're even at the national level of Key Club, working with students from across many states. Let us know what that particular scope is. We also would love to know, do you plan to be involved with this in college? And you're in no way committing to do so. Maybe you're involved in soccer and you're not planning to be recruited or to play at the varsity level, but you'd love to play club or intramural. You can let us know that that's something that is a part of your life now and you want it to continue to be a part of your life in some capacity in the future. Then it comes to, how often are you participating in this activity? So Diana mentioned the example of working at an ice cream shop, and maybe that's something that you do year round. Maybe it's something you just do over the summer. Maybe you do just during the school year. Let us know that time of year. And now with that job, it might be in the winter, you're not working a ton of hours. It's cold out. Not a ton of people are going to buy ice cream, but in the summer, you're working a lot at that ice cream shop. So it can be hard to think about how many hours should I be putting down a week, because it does vary. And I would say to think about what is sort of the average level of participation, and then let us know that extreme. I work X hours during the academic year, but I work Y hours over the summer. Let us know that context. Similarly, that works for activities. I know I was involved in theater, and I remember when I was filling out my application, I stopped to think, well, how much time do I dedicate to this activity? I know Tech Week we're really busy and I'm at school all the time for this, but I know that's not a typical dedication of hours. So how should I fill this out? And really try to think about what's that average commitment. And then you can let us know, again, those extreme circumstances. And then in that description, you really want to tell us, what is this club? What have you done? Have you had any accomplishments and honors in it? And similar to Diana saying, you don't necessarily need that title of leader in order to demonstrate leadership. So maybe you've been an integral part of your senior class board, even though you're not necessarily the president. Tell us what that role has been, what you've contributed to the team. And I think, again, all of this comes together for that context piece. I like to say we as admission officers are professional Googlers, because if someone has an activity that I don't know, I'm gonna turn to Google. My high school didn't have a marching band, so I wasn't familiar with what a drum major did. So a quick little Google search later, I had a better understanding. But what I didn't have a better understanding of is exactly what a drum major did at that particular high school. And so if you're able to give us as much context as possible, we really know what that looked like in your particular school. And a little tip I'll give you is that as you're filling out this section of the application, it can be really helpful to have a family member or friend who is not familiar with your high school or district to look it over and see if they have an understanding of what it is you've been involved with, or if they have any questions. Just having that fresh set of eyes will give you a sense of what perhaps an admission officer might bring to the situation if they're not familiar with that particular activity at your particular high school. And I will pass it on to Diana.
Okay, so maybe you are not a senior right now, or you're not really necessarily thinking about your application. You're trying to decide, how should I spend my time in high school? We know that your time is finite, so we want you to be cognizant of this as you're really calling your activities list, both in terms of what you want to engage in, but also what you want to list in your application. So how do you choose what to participate in? Again, I want to reiterate that we as admissions officers are not looking for any specific role, hobby, activity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of that, we want you to be uniquely you. And that is something that you'll hear from across our peer institutions and beyond. This is genuinely just trying to get to know you. We hope that you choose activities also from which you can learn and grow and actually enjoy. We want you to like how you're spending your time. Remember that this is for you and not for your application. And finally, something on a personal note is that this is such an incredible moment of self-discovery, and I hope that you really approach it in this way. So, for example, going in that transition from middle school to high school, I really felt like I knew my lane, and I had played it safe and remained in the same types of activities that I had participated in. And then suddenly, my junior year, my friends convinced me to audition for the marching band. So I did. I was really not interested in it at all, but it was kind of this bet we had made, essentially. And I joined the marching band. I stuck with it for my remaining 2 years in high school, and it ended up becoming the most important community to me in high school. So like I said, self-discovery, it's about trying new things. And this doesn't mean like go ahead and cancel every single activity that you're in right now and just totally rework it, but really just take a chance and try something new. Maybe you will love it like I did, and maybe you won't like it, but that is also a really good a moment in which this is a mistake that maybe you won't make later in your life. You're learning something new about yourself now, and that's information that will be important to you as you're moving forward in college and beyond.
So we have a little activity here where Diana and I are both admission officers. We both read applications, and so we are going to look through a fictional section of the common application where a student has given us their activities. So Diana, if you were reading this application, reviewing this section, what are the things that you would learn?
Okay, so I'm putting on my reader hat right now, Emily.
Yes.
So I'm seeing that we have a student here who was for 4 years in the marching band playing clarinet, and senior year was the drum major, so had leadership there. And I see that this student also joined speech and debate, it looks like junior year, and had leadership through coaching teammates. So that was a nice mentorship capacity that the student served in, and also organized events in a more formal role as vice president. Cool.
Great. So yeah, so we learned some helpful things about the student, what they're interested in, how they've chosen to spend their time. But we're going to move forward a slide. And what we have here is the same student who has given us more context about those activities and how they're spending their time. So Diana, what stands out here in terms of the new things we've learned that maybe we didn't have, or that stand out even more than they did in the previous application or previous version?
Yeah, so this is super exciting to me right now, and I'll step in really fast and just say we want to make sure that you understand that this isn't better because it's longer, but really because of the context it is providing. So here we go. It's the same activity, marching band for 4 years, leadership in the title for both of these roles. It's really nice to see. Immediately my eye is drawn to that, and I know the role that this student played in this organization. I see here also context into the size of the band. It's an 80+ member band. Now I know that this isn't just maybe 5 tubas who assembled in an alley like once, but really like a large organization that looks like it met regularly. I also want to add here that whether your marching band is 15 people or 150 people, that does not matter for us. You can't control the type of school and environment and the size of your community, but this does give us context into the type of leader that you had to be. So that's really helpful. And then I see that the student had this really nice progression in leadership too in this marching band. So they were kind of climbing the ranks, ascending those ranks from section leader to drum major assistant. This is someone who has played a really valuable role in this organization since 9th grade, evidently. Into this speech and debate team, again, that leadership in the title, that's really helpful. I have more context into the type of debate that the student engages in. And then I see here there's more specificity about the mentorship role. The student coached 5 underclassmen and organized 2 campus debates. So now I know what that event organization looks like more. There's also an additional entry here, Emily, and I would love if you could maybe give us your insight there.
Yeah, so we see here there's this other down at the bottom, which is a family responsibility. And so that was something that in the previous version of this was going on in the background, but we didn't know. That was a part of the student's personal story that we just were not aware of. And so again, what's really helpful here is the student has given us more context about the way they engage with their world. And so we're seeing they take care of a younger sibling, they help translate for their parents, and they're also helping to take care of a grandparent. We're also seeing, the student tells us this is every year, year round, and they've averaged it out to about 5 hours a week. So again, this is something that was always happening for this student, but this is and I'm imagining it's a pretty important part of their story, given the amount of time they've dedicated to it all this time. And it's something that would have been missing from their story otherwise if they hadn't been able to include this as another piece. So as Diana mentioned before, we really want to emphasize what we're hoping to learn here. It's how are students spending their time outside of the classroom, not just in those what students would think of as traditional clubs or extracurriculars, but all of those various pieces of how they're spending their time. And we'll go through some of our tips for the process. And as Diana said earlier, there is no right or wrong activity. There is no activity we're looking for. It's also helpful to remember there are, I believe, hundreds of clubs and organizations represented on Penn's campus. And so we're looking for students who would engage in all of them and even bring new activities and interests to campus that aren't already represented. So there is no one type of interest that we're looking for. I'm sure Diana can attest to this. We have received questions in the past from families, very well-meaning. My child is about to enter high school. What club should they join to guarantee admission to Penn? And again, there is no one club. There's no right or wrong activity. It's important that you spend your time doing things that are really meaningful to you and provide value to you.
The second point right here, being thoughtful, don't spread yourself too thin. This is advice that I still need in my current stage in life. Remember that I referenced this earlier, but your time is finite. And like in your academics, we hope that in your extracurriculars, you can challenge yourself, but to a reasonable extent. We want you to arrive to college, to the university, happy and healthy and as whole human beings. And this is really, this is going to set you up for success in college and beyond.
Along those lines, it's okay to be lopsided or rounded in your interests. So maybe you're really passionate about dance and that is how you are spending all your time. You live, breathe, sleep, dream, dance. That is what you do. Or maybe you're exploring your interests. And so you're involved in the arts, you're also involved in athletics, you have a part-time job, you're really exploring a lot of different interests. Both of those are fine great, wonderful ways to pursue your interests. And as Diana said, with balance, we wouldn't want that student who is so passionate about dance, they're spending all their time doing that, to then spread themselves too thin by adding student government because they felt they needed to have another thing to look well-rounded to an admissions office. Again, we want students to pursue those things that provide meaning for them, and that looks different for every student. Again, that goes back to that piece that every student has their own story, and we want to really understand what your story is.
And on that same note, that your time is valuable, and we hope that you enjoy how you spend it. It's going to be, like we said, challenging, and there will be moments when you want to quit and you're going to persevere through it. But overall, we want to make sure that you are you're really like reaping the fruits of these activities that you are engaging in. Like, high school is really a special formative time, and we want to make sure that you can look back on it with some degree of fondness. I know it's not perfect, and remember that you are engaging in these activities for yourself and not for college. So I think going back to that, like that dancer theme that we have here, sometimes we'll have counselors call and say, you know, this student for 8 years has been dancing, and this has been their whole life, and they're saying now that maybe they actually don't like it and they want to quit, but they're not sure what that's going to look like on the college end. And we'll always say that the student needs to do what is best for them, and that again is part of their story, part of their context, and that will come through in your application as long as you articulate it in that way.
And picking right up off of that, it's important, again, to be really specific when articulating your experiences. As Diana has said before, we don't know what you don't tell us. So if you don't give us that context, if you don't fully spell out what those activities are, well, we can do a lot of Googling and searching and trying to better understand those activities. It's help us help you. If you give us more information, we'll be able to better understand that context in your story.
Great. And finally, just remember that your senior year does not end whenever you submit your application, whether that's early decision, early action for other schools, regular decision, rolling, etc. We really do want you to enjoy whatever time you have left of your high school experience and celebrate those milestones that you'll have through graduation and beyond. I know that it looks different, and maybe you weren't expecting it to be this way necessarily, but there are still so many things to celebrate. You are wrapping up your 4 years of high school. You're concluding this really amazing, like I said, formative journey that you're going through, and we want to make sure that you're able to enjoy that and celebrate and recognize those milestones for what they are.
Great. And with that, we will start taking some questions. Feel free to enter them in the Q&A chat, and those will make their way over to us. I do want to note here on the screen, here are some ways to connect with us. So that Visit Penn virtually is what I mentioned earlier. If you're interested in some of our other programming, maybe some of our other application advice series, or a virtual info session or virtual campus tour, you can find all of that information through that Visit Penn virtually. Additionally, you can do a virtual tour on your own. If you go through our virtual visit section, you'll be able to do a live student-led virtual tour, or you can do it all on your own and do a virtual tour through the second link, or look for our YouTube where we have an application advice series, or check out our social at Previewing Penn on Instagram.
Emily, I see a question right here that I'd love to take to start, if that sounds okay. So I'm going to read it out loud. This question says, how can students indicate a progression in leadership on their applications? And I think that, I don't know if you want to like zoom back to that earlier slide, if that's okay, but I think that this frankly is a draft that we did. This was not an actual student that we decided to showcase. There's privacy concerns there, of course, but I think that this fake student did a really good job of showing that progression of leadership. You see how they have this person put parentheses around the year that they had a specific role. I think that's a really nice, concise way of showing the different roles that you've had in different years. So that's definitely a style that we welcome you to emulate, or however else you see fit to show that progression. There's a second question here, Emily, that I'll bounce to you.
Yeah.
It says, how can you explain how to best use the additional information section?
That is a great question because the additional information section is a great place to include that extra context information. I will say what not to do. Don't use it to write a second Common App essay. So all of the Common App prompts or coalition prompts that are there, sometimes a student thinks they've written two really great ones and they just can't decide, so they put a second one in that additional information section. That's not the best way to use it. But I think, again, putting in bullet points with detailed information about things you want us to know. I've seen sometimes students will use it to talk about context with a club, or perhaps I went to states for this competition and this is what happened there. I've seen students use it to better explain research opportunities they've had. Sometimes students will use it to explain a family circumstance, something that changed for them that has altered the context of their activities or just their general high school experience. Or sometimes, like Diana was mentioning, a student has discovered a shift in interests, whether it's dancing at an elite level, sports at an elite level. They just get burned out and they realize that's not what they're really passionate about anymore. They've done it because they felt they were supposed to. And so they want to explain that to us in a little bit more depth about how they're now using that time, or they've refocused since quitting that activity. So again, I think what's most helpful there, don't write a second essay. Give us those bullet points that are detailed enough to allow us to know that context, but haven't gone beyond in sort of creating that really flowery prose.
I'll take this next question right here. It's a really good one and something that we've actually been thinking about, Emily and I. So the question reads, if a competition-based activity was canceled this year, can we still list it on the Common App or whatever other app?
Great question.
So, yeah, so I'll go ahead and answer this one. So here's the thing. If, let's say that there is this competition-based activity and you were, let me just like use an example, like a concrete example. So let's use FBLA, since Future Business Leaders of America, it exists across the country in different forms. We know that students often will take an exam to place into a local competition or a state competition, etc. So in thinking about like an activity like this, if you, let's say that you had gotten the chance to take the exam and that you placed into this regional competition or the state competition, and that competition was canceled, you placing into that competition was an accomplishment. So that is something that we of course want to know, and something that you should definitely list. You can say that this competition was ultimately canceled, so you couldn't actually participate in it. That is context, of course, for us that we want to know. But if this is more like this is in a competition that I would have participated in, or even using a different example like student council, let's say like our student council elections were canceled, but if I had run, I would have won out of this in this group of 20 people. That's a little bit more hypothetical and stuff that maybe is not as productive or constructive, but ultimately you should use your discretion here and decide, what is this event meaningful to you? What role has it played throughout the rest of your high school experience? And just be like truthful with us in that way. Again, we don't know what you don't tell us. So give us that context, but still be judicious in that way. Emily, there's a question here. Oh, this is a great one. Would you recommend submitting a resume? If so, how?
Great question. Yes. So it all depends, again, on you and your personal context. If you filled out that section of the Common Application or the Coalition application and you feel all of my activities, all of my information is perfectly conveyed here, then no, there's no need to add an additional resume as just an additional piece. If, however, you're looking at that activities and you feel, I haven't really had the space to fully explain what this activity is, how I've been involved with it, how my leadership has progressed, then an additional resume can be a great option. And the way you can submit that is after you have applied to Penn, once you have submitted the application, either the Common Application or the Coalition application, after a certain point, you will be invited to the Penn applicant portal. And in the Penn applicant portal, you actually have the option to upload yourself a resume or a research abstract. So you can actually control all of that on your own, and we'll have access to that when we're reading your file.
This next question is a really good one in the context of COVID, I think. So should we include trivial things in our activity section, such as dedicating 1 or 2 days a week to family and friends, or teaching yourself to play an instrument, juggle, do magic, etc.? And I kind of want to start off by saying, don't think this is trivial. I think that honestly, for us at least, doing anything right now is truly an accomplishment, and just like getting up and trying new things in particular. So we know that the plate of activities from which you were able to choose recently, and maybe still, has been truncated by what's going on right now. So if these are things that you've been doing that is important to you, of course list them. And again, this is a moment to include context. Like, say, you know, maybe this was an activity that was really grounding for me during this time, or like this really provided like solace for me. We want to understand why these are also important to you, and why you chose to list them. So make sure that you add that context too. But of course, I want to reiterate, don't consider this trivial. This is, again, how we're all managing through this current moment.
Absolutely. And again, I think that goes back to sort of your personal story. There are a lot of people in our office who love to bake. We don't do it at a club level. We're not doing it in an organized fashion. But if I met someone and I didn't tell them that piece of my context, they would be missing a huge part of who I am. So I think it really emphasizes what we've talked about, that not all activities are organized clubs, that there are so many different varieties.
It's true. Emily is a tremendous baker, and I will forever remember her in that way.
Thank you.
This next question here is, should we include different honor societies? If so, should we put them in the honor section or the activity section? Emily, you want to take that?
Sure. I think it depends, again, that context. You're going to hear us use that word over and over again. And I think that depends on how that honor society functions at your school. At some places, the honor society, once you've been accepted into it, there's really not much that happens with it again. You're not necessarily meeting. And then at others, you are doing work within that honor society. So I think it's easy to think about whether it's something that's static or dynamic. Is it something that it was an achievement that happened? Or is it something that you're really involved with and continue to participate with? Again, every high school is different, so let us know how it functions at your high school, but that's a personal decision that you can make based on what it's meant for you.
And I think this next question is pretty related to that. Where in the application do you suggest discussing a long daily commute to school? So similarly, I could see this fitting into the activity section, or even in the additional information section. There's a chance your counselor will also talk about it. Those redundancies are totally fine. Ultimately, this is up to you, but you really want to think about what kind of role has this played in your day-to-day, and I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer here. You have different choices. And again, there are so many sections of the application because we do want to create these redundancies and catch whatever we can. I think that each of these pieces of the application are intentional in how they kind of prompt you to think a little bit differently and analyze different parts of your life in order to form that whole story. So wherever you think it's most appropriate for you would be totally fine. We will read it. Emily, the next question here is, should we use the COVID essay to talk about activities we've had canceled?
Yeah, I think that's another great question. And I think that COVID essay is going to look different for everyone. And I think one of the things to emphasize, it's not really an essay as much as it is an open text where you can discuss. So don't feel you need to write a creative essay about how COVID has impacted you, or a persuasive 5-paragraph essay about that cancellation and what its impact has been on you. It can be a place to discuss that. I think it sort of depends on what that change has been. So if it's something where you feel you can cover it well in the activities section where you're telling us a pivot, I was vice president of debate and I organized these 2 campus debates, but this year we're doing it over Zoom. And so we organized a debate over Zoom. Or if you want to tell us that you were selected for a certain thing, maybe you were selected for Boys State this year, and perhaps it didn't happen, perhaps it happened over Zoom. Again, that's something you can tell us in that COVID section. It really is up to you. As Diana said, redundancies aren't a bad thing. So if you want to have it in multiple places, that's great too.
So this next question here is, if hours vary from week to week or even from one year to another, how do we indicate this? And I think that Emily had a really good suggestion here where in terms of, in order to be, for the sake of brevity, it's a good idea to average these into the like the time section that the Common App, Coalition App, QuestBridge application will prompt you to do. However, if there are like certain circumstances, if that context really compels you to want to share those specific nuances of your activity, then you can feel free to do that within that same activities in the description. Maybe in the same way that the one student, that the fake student captured their the years that they participated in a certain role. You could do that same thing, maybe like in season, it looks like this. Out of season, it looks more like this. Or even like in sophomore year, it looked like this, but with COVID, it was more like this. That's all, again, at your discretion if you want to do that. But remember that description section of the Common App, Coalition App, QuestBridge app, those do have a word limit. So again, it's up to you to decide on that. This next question, Emily, I'm finding where I am. There's so many questions coming in. What is the Penn application portal? Isn't Penn's app under the Common App?
Yes, so to apply to Penn, you either submit the Common application or the Coalition application. And you would do that through either of their websites. Once you have submitted that to Penn, you will get an email with information about how you can access your Penn applicant portal. And that will keep you apprised of the materials we've received. It will allow you to see if anything is missing in your checklist. Maybe we are still waiting on one of your teacher recommendations or a transcript. So you're able to see that, reach out to whoever you need to at your school to keep track of it. That's also where you'll be able to upload any of those pieces. And it's also where you'll receive your decision. So that Penn applicant portal in the end is going to be very important, but you won't have any access to that until you've submitted your application through either the Common application or the Coalition application.
This next question is a really good one. It asks, how would you go about conveying the effect that a significant health problem had on your life/time/activity involvement? And once again, this is a piece that could be addressed in so many places in the application. Maybe in the activity section, maybe not, because that's again a more limited, has a more limited character count. For example, some students may choose to address this in their personal essay in the Common App, Coalition App, QuestBridge app. But also we know that students have a lot that they want to write about, and we don't want you to necessarily think that your entire story has to be centered around maybe a health obstacle, a challenge that you've had in that way. So I think that this is one of those moments where I would, in particular, if you want to write that essay, that is great, and that is something that is up to you. But this is where the additional information section is really helpful, because if you don't want to center your written story on that, if you don't want to dedicate or if the application activity section is not large enough for you to convey your story, then the additional information section is a really great place where you can further talk about that impact, because you can, what'll be really nice about the this section is that it'll pause it, we'll glance at it and we'll say, okay, now we can revisit these activities and the, for example, maybe even your transcript in the context of now knowing that this was also a piece of your life. Also, this would be maybe something to nudge your counselor to talk about too, because it's really nice to see that corroboration among the different members of your community who are writing about you and who maybe have had, if they've had insight and if you feel comfortable sharing that, they could also attest to how that's impacted your experience. This next question is, if we've been doing something since middle school, how should we indicate this? in parentheses if we're only allowed to indicate grades 9 through 12.
So if there's an activity that has been a big part of your life, maybe you've been playing piano since age 4, or you got your first pair of ice skates around the same time you could walk, that is something that you can put in the description of the activity. So while you might be indicating 9 through 12 for piano, in that description you might note started playing piano at age 5, and then talk more about what you've been doing. Again, it's helpful for us to know that this has been a long-standing passion for you, and it gives us an understanding of perhaps the background, the foundation you have for that activity. But we really want to know what that engagement has been in high school. So we don't necessarily need to know the hours spent per week those earlier years. Again, if there's something that has been really a big part of your story, maybe you've been training for the Olympics since age 5, and so that has been truly your life all the time. So that might be something you want to put in the additional information. But if you really want us to know because it shows just how important that activity is to you, because it is something you've been involved with all this time, I think you can just put that in the description. Diana, would you agree with that?
Definitely, well stated. This next question is, if we want to submit a resume, any recommendations for how long it should be? And this is a careful balance that you need to strike, because on one hand, it should be as long as you need it to be, but really with emphasis on the need. So we would really appreciate that being succinct and concise. We see a lot of these, so many pieces of paper. Our applicant pool is generally around 40,000 applications a year, and we carefully read all of these. So please be kind to our eyes. Emily and I are real people just like you, and really ask yourself, how much do you need to convey what you're trying to convey? Maybe that means asking someone else to glance it over, as Emily recommended earlier, and seeing what here might be repetitive, what here is really like the gist of it. Maybe draw out like main ideas from that and go on from there. But again, as long as you need it to be, but keeping in mind that we see a lot of paper and a lot of screens. This next question is, this is a good one for you, Emily, for sure. How do you appreciate a theme or common thread through our activities, or a balance of many different types of activities? This is what you talked about this a little bit earlier.
Yes, I did. So essentially the answer is yes. If you have a theme that runs through your activities, great. If you have a balance of activities and you're trying all different things, great. We don't have a preference. You don't need to feel that you have to put yourself in a box and be like, I am eco kid and I am focused on all things environmental, and so I'm going to do this activity, I'm going to do that activity, and I'm going to put together this package that is eco because that's what colleges want. If, however, you love doing all those environmental things and it just so happens that's how it comes together, great. On the flip side, you start this club and you then join that club and they're all really disparate and different. That's also great. Again, we don't have a preference there, but really do what you're interested in, not what you think we want to see, because if you put together this environmentally focused activities, but it's only because you think that you need to have that common theme and not because you're really interested in it, you'll have wasted time in your 4 years of high school you could have been spending doing things that really were important and interesting to you.
Next question. Let's see. What is one common thing that students don't take advantage of in the activity section? This is something to think about. I would say, I think that just like thinking off the top of my head, I would say that like specificity is something that students often miss. And I think this is definitely one of the reasons that we're holding a session like this, is because we want you to be specific. In particular, Emily and I will read applications. We have territories that we specialize in, but we also read applications for so many other parts of the country and the world. So there are moments when maybe we're not familiar with a certain acronym, and sometimes Google doesn't yield results for that because it's particular to just your high school or just your grade. Like there are limits to what exists online. So specificity on that end, and telling us exactly, spelling out acronyms, telling us what kind of role that is, and what is unique, if anything, about you in that role? Like what has changed? I would say one other thing is that the leadership in the title, love that. It's really, really helpful for us. And just any sort of like progression that you want us to know about too. I think that the activity, as Emily stated, really hones in on that, but something to keep in mind as you're going through this section. The next question here is, these are such good questions, everyone. So do we have to use full sentences and punctuation in the activity section? We're also thinking about like concerns for the character limit, etc.
So it's that fine line between readability and brevity. So I would say you don't need to have those full sentences, punctuation, but you still want it to be readable. So there might be certain words that you end up abbreviating just slightly, using numbers instead of spelling out one or something like that. But again, make sure it all makes sense, because I've seen a few where students don't include spaces in the description in order to maximize the characters, and that is pretty hard to read. So really make sure that you're looking through all of those different pieces and thinking about, is this readable? And that's if you are spelling this out in the application and you're realizing, I don't have enough in that description piece with the character limits, or I can't spell out the entire name of the organization because of the character limit. That's a really great indication that it would be very helpful for you to also submit a resume, so that we're able to have that fully filled out activity section, and then you're able to give us more depth later on that you feel is important to truly convey the activity.
Yeah, and on that same note, I see some questions of concern around that, the character limit and the acronym. I'm going to plug in the additional information section there too. Maybe you don't think that it warrants submitting an additional resume, but you want to put in that information in the additional information section. That's a good place to spell it out. So next, and this might be one of our final questions, as I see that time is ticking here. But the question is, how do you verify that students are doing these activities? And that is, again, a very good question, and something that we think about often. So these, I mean, ultimately, like we said, our pool is 40,000, around 40,000 students every year that submit an application to Penn. They're in a way, in the same way that college functions, a lot of this is on an honor system. We aren't going to go through and verify every single piece, every single detail that someone puts in their application. But this is a really good moment when we think about how the activity section relates to the other parts of your application. We think about that idea of corroboration. If something is really important to you and you speak about it in that way, usually that comes up somewhere else in your application, from your counselor, from your teacher recommendations, from an additional recommendation, etc. It usually exists somewhere else. And especially when we start getting to these really big titles and recognitions, that's the moment when we do start to think about all of those pieces and thinking about how that might whether or not there's truth behind that or not. But overall, we're not doing fact checks, etc. I think I also want to use this moment to plug in really fast. Someone asked us, I was in a session a while ago where someone asked how closely we check social media and stuff, and I think this is like a really good question to ask as well, where my coworker here at Penn responded saying, we only check Snapchat, and then everyone totally got scared. It is not true. We don't check social media unless you're pointing to social media as an accomplishment. So maybe you have hundreds of thousands of followers on TikTok because of one specific thing that you chose to tell us about. Sometimes we're intrigued and we will go into that, or you have a really famous Instagram account, or views on YouTube, etc. If you list it, it's fair game for us to go and explore further, and that goes for whatever activity you list on your application, if it's so it intrigues us in that way. Great. So Emily, I think that seeing that it's 4:59, we can wrap up here.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And while we are not able to be present on Penn's physical campus, we do want to do a brief land acknowledgement and acknowledge that Penn occupies the land of the Lenni Lenape, and that we express our gratitude to be able to exist on this land and acknowledge the inhabitants past and present for the opportunity to learn on Lenapehoking, land of the Lenape. So again, thank you so much everyone for joining us today. And we really hope this session has been helpful and you've been able to learn something new. So thanks again. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.